In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the process of creating an archive. An archive, remember, is a single file that contains multiple other files. Why do we create an archive? Well, we might be doing this for backup purposes. Say we want to back up some critical system directory. Or perhaps we have a set of files that we want to easily transport to another system. Maybe we want to create an email attachment, and it's much easier to attach a single archive than it is to perhaps attach the multiple files. With these archives, one of the other things we want to take a look at is the ability to compress the archive. This will, of course, make its size much easier to work with. Now, the command line utility we're going to use to work with archives here is called tar. And tar has to be followed by a function, a basic function. And the three basic functions we want to focus on are creating an archive, listing the contents of an existing archive, and ultimately extracting from that archive. And so we need to specify which of those three functions we want to do. Now, to start off with here, we're going to create an archive, which would be the option C. Additionally, we need to specify the name of the archive that we want to create. And so we pass an option called F, followed by the name of the archive that we want to create. Now, I'm going to insert a couple of other options here between the C and the F. The first one I like to use is V, which stands for verbose. What this will do is it will actually list all of the files as it's putting them into the archive. And then the second option I want to insert in here is Z. Z is a form of compression. And we actually have a few different choices for this. Z does the type of compression known as gzip. It's probably one of the older compression types we have and is universally available across all Linuxes and Unixes. And in fact, a tar.gz file can be even opened with some utilities on a Windows system. But some other compressions we have that can achieve a little bit higher compression would be to use the letter J in both its lower or uppercase forms. In lowercase, J stands for bzip2 as the compression, and capital J stands for compression of XZ. Both of those compression types would achieve greater compression typically than what gzip will do, but gzip has been sort of the universal, always around one, so I'm going to stick with gzip. Now, you'll notice that I've named my archive etc.tar.gz. This is the traditional method. It's a .tar archive, and the .gz is to visually indicate what form of compression we used on this archive. Now, some operating systems don't like this idea of multiple dots, so it is also common to abbreviate this as .tgz as an option. But I like the more spread out form. And so that's the name of the archive I'm going to create. Now, what am I going to put in that archive? What are the files? Well, since this is being done as a backup of an important system configuration directory, namely etc, I'm just going to put the directory itself. And what tar will do is actually go into etc and copy all of the files from that directory into this archive. Now when I hit return, this is going to go scrolling off my screen because remember I specified verbose. And so we see the list of all the files being placed into that archive. And remember the command we had done was C to create, V verbosely, Z to compress it with gzip, and F the name of the archive is the next argument. So we've created an archive. If I do an ls-l of that file, we see that it's about 8 meg of content, which is all of the files found in Etsy. Now, the second function of tar I'd like to take a look at is T. T stands for Table of Contents. In effect, it is listing the contents of this archive. Again, I want to specify what kind of file it is. And so it's /temp/etsy.tar.gz. But remember, it's also compressed. And so traditionally, most of us would put the form of compression in the command. And so I do a tar tzf of etsy.tar.gz. Now, normally when I do a table of contents like this, it simply gives me the list of file names. But tar not only backs up the names and contents of these files, it also backs up the additional attributes of those files, things like ownership and permissions associated with those files. To be able to view that, what I can do is add to my T a V for verbose, and the output would be more like a long listing from ls to be able to see those other file attributes. The other thing I'd like to point out is that recent versions of tar, I can also leave out the Z. Tar will look at the file, and if it appears to be compressed with gzip or with bzip2 or with xz, it'll automatically assume you wanted that option specified, and so will uncompress it in order to display the contents here. So let's see what the long listing looks like. And you can see that for each of those files, it shows me the permissions, it shows me the ownership, the date and time of last modification, and then the name of the file. And so we've got a couple of different ways we can get a listing of contents. T is the basic function. If I add a V for verbose, I can get a much longer listing. The final function we want to take a look at here is to extract from this archive. Now, the simplest way to extract is to have the entire contents of the archive placed in the current directory. And so my current working directory is I'm in root's home directory. And notice the names of the file here are etsy/rwtab.d/sssd. Notice it's a relative path name. So if I were to extract the contents here while I'm in /root, root's home directory, it's going to create a subdirectory of that called etc, and then under there create rwtab.d, and then under there put sssd. So the extraction to the current directory is done with the function x. Again, if I want to see this as it's happening, I could put V for verbose, but let's not have it go scrolling off the screen this time. Again, I specify the file, temp etsy tar.gz, and again, I could put the Z to specify the type of compression, but tar these days will auto-detect that for me. And as I do that extraction, since I did not put the V, it didn't list it for me, but if I do an ls here in root's home directory, there we see now an etc subdirectory, and as I look in there, I see the contents of the files that have been restored. So what we have seen here is the use of tar to create an archive, to list the contents of an archive, and to extract from an archive. We have also seen how, with an extra option to tar, we can have it automatically perform compression and decompression for these archives.